The rain hammered against the window of the Blue Aster diner the night Marisol Vance's hand trembled over a check pad, her pen circling 4 words that would either save a man's life or end her own: Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, hit that like button, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs a little hope tonight, and subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales so you never miss a story like this one. And before we go further, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know who's sitting with me for this one. Marisol had worked the graveyard shift at the Blue Aster for 6 years, ever since her husband's accident left her raising 2 kids alone on a waitress's wages and whatever tips the night owls of the city could spare. She knew the diner's rhythms the way a sailor knows tides, the truckers who came in at midnight smelling of diesel and loneliness, the college kids nursing coffee to avoid going home, and the quiet, dangerous men who sat in the corner booth every Thursday, men who tipped generously and spoke rarely, men everyone in the neighborhood knew better than to look at too long. The man in the corner booth that particular Thursday was Dominic Reyes, though few people said his name above a whisper. He was not the kind of man Marisol had ever imagined she'd care whether lived or died. He wore tailored coats even in summer, ordered black coffee and eggs he barely touched, and always sat facing the door, except, on that night, he didn't. That night, distracted by a phone call that made his jaw tighten and his knuckles whiten around his cup, he sat with his back exposed to the front entrance, a mistake a man like him rarely made twice, because there usually wasn't a second time. Marisol noticed the man who walked in a few minutes later, average height, gray jacket, hands shoved deep in his pockets in a way that wasn't about the cold. She had waited tables long enough to read a room, to know the difference between nervous and dangerous, and something about the stillness in his eyes, the way he scanned the diner without ever looking at the menu board, made the hair on her arms rise. When he slid into a booth that gave him a clear line to Dominic's back and ordered nothing but water, she felt her stomach drop through the floor. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself that whatever these men did in the dark corners of the city was not something a single mother making $11 an hour plus tips should involve herself in. She had 2 daughters at home, Talia and Rosa, ages 7 and 10, asleep under a roof that still had a mortgage on it, and a life that could not survive the kind of trouble that walked through doors like the Blue Asters on nights like this. And yet, when she looked at Dominic Reyes, oblivious and vulnerable in a way she suspected he hadn't been in years, she thought of her own husband, gone too soon, and how there had been no one to warn him the night his heart gave out alone in a parking garage. She thought about how a single sentence, a single warning, might have changed everything. She approached the corner booth with the check, her hands steady only through sheer will, and set it down in front of Dominic with a practiced smile, the same smile she gave every customer, revealing nothing. But beneath the itemized total for his eggs and coffee, she had circled words in the margin, pressing the pen hard enough to nearly tear the paper: Gunman behind you. Deal gone wrong. Exit now. She did not look at him as she set it down. She did not linger. She walked back toward the kitchen with her heart slamming against her ribs, terrified that she had just signed her own death warrant, terrified that she had misread the entire situation, terrified most of all that she hadn't. Dominic Reyes did not react the way she feared. He did not startle, did not draw a weapon, did not do anything that would have alerted the man in the gray jacket that his cover was blown. Instead, he simply folded the check, slid a $50 bill onto the table, and stood as though heading to the restroom, moving with the unhurried calm of a man who had spent his entire adult life training his body not to betray his mind. He walked past the gray-jacketed man's booth, and in one smooth, terrible motion, he was gone through the kitchen's side exit, the same door the cooks used to take out the trash, the same door Marisol had shown him without a word, catching his eye for just long enough to point with her chin. The gunman waited 7 more minutes before he understood his target had vanished, and by then, sirens were already threading through the wet streets, because Marisol, in the chaos of it all, had also quietly dialed 911 from the payphone by the restrooms, giving an address and a description and nothing more, her voice a whisper, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hang up the receiver. What followed in the days after was not the relief Marisol expected. It was fear, heavy and constant, the kind that made her check the locks 3 times before bed, that made her flinch at every car that idled too long outside the apartment building. She did not know if Dominic Reyes knew who had warned him, or if he even cared, and she told herself that was fine, that she had done what her conscience demanded and that would have to be enough. She went back to work the following Thursday with her chin up and her hands busy, refusing to let the fear own her, because Talia and Rosa needed a mother who still believed the world could be survived. It was nearly closing time when the bell above the diner door chimed, and Marisol looked up to see Dominic Reyes standing in the entrance, alone, no bodyguards, no entourage, just a tired-looking man in a coat that had seen better days. Her heart climbed into her throat as he walked toward the counter and sat, not in his usual corner booth, but directly across from where she stood, forcing her to look him in the eye for the first time in 6 years of serving him coffee. He did not thank her the way people do in movies. He simply asked her name, really asked, as though he had never once bothered to learn it in all the Thursdays he had occupied that corner booth, and when she told him, he nodded slowly, like he was filing it away somewhere it would not be forgotten. He told her, in a voice quieter than she expected from a man of his reputation, that the deal that night had indeed gone wrong, that the man in the gray jacket had been sent by a rival who wanted him gone before sunrise, and that if she had not written those 4 words, he would not have walked out of that diner alive. He said it plainly, without theater, the way a person states a fact about the weather, and somehow that made it more chilling and more real than any dramatic confession could have. Marisol did not know what to say to a man like that, a man whose world was built on violence and consequence, so she said the only true thing she had, that she hadn't done it for him specifically, that she had done it because she couldn't watch another person die in front of her without trying to stop it, because she had already lost someone to a silence that could have been broken, and she refused to carry that kind of guilt twice in one lifetime. Something shifted in Dominic's face when she said that, some old grief surfacing behind his eyes, and for a moment the dangerous man in the tailored coat looked simply like a man who understood loss. He left an envelope on the counter before he walked out that night, and Marisol did not open it until her shift ended, sitting alone in her car in the diner's cracked parking lot. Inside was more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life, enough to pay off the remainder of her mortgage, enough to start college funds for both her daughters, enough to change the trajectory of a family that had been barely staying afloat since the day her husband's heart stopped in that parking garage. There was no note, no explanation, just the weight of a debt Dominic Reyes clearly felt could never truly be repaid but intended to try anyway. In the weeks that followed, the corner booth at the Blue Aster remained empty on Thursdays, and Marisol found herself wondering, with a strange mixture of relief and worry, whether Dominic Reyes had simply moved on, found safer places to conduct whatever business men like him conducted, or whether something worse had happened to him after all. She did not have an answer for a long time, and she told herself it was better not to know, that she had done her part and the rest of his story was his to carry alone. Then, nearly 2 months later, a young man walked into the diner during the lunch rush, nervous and polished in a way that didn't match the neighborhood, and asked specifically for Marisol Vance. He introduced himself as someone who worked for Dominic, though he was careful never to use words like boss or organization, and he told her that Dominic had left the life behind entirely, walked away from the deals and the danger and the corner booths where death could find him over a plate of untouched eggs. He said Dominic had used the fear of that night as the reason he'd finally been looking for to get out, that her 4 circled words hadn't just saved his life that Thursday, they had shown him how close he had come to losing it entirely for a world that had never once looked out for him the way a stranger had, with nothing to gain and everything to lose. The young man left an address, a modest bakery 2 towns over that Dominic had apparently bought and was now running quietly, anonymously, under a name that wasn't his own, trading the violence of his old life for the simple rhythm of flour and yeast and mornings that didn't require looking over his shoulder. He said Dominic wanted her to know, if she ever wanted a fresh start herself, there would always be a job waiting for her there, no questions, no strings, just an open door from one person who understood what it meant to be given a second chance to another who had given him his. Marisol did not take the job. Her life was rooted at the Blue Aster, in the neighborhood where her daughters went to school, in the small apartment that finally felt like it belonged to her family instead of the bank. But she kept the address folded in her wallet for years afterward, a quiet reminder that kindness, even when it trembled with fear, even when it seemed like it might cost everything, had a way of rippling outward into places you could never predict, changing lives you might never see change. If this story moved something in you tonight, if it reminded you that even the smallest act of courage can alter the course of someone's entire life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling me what part touched you most, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances today, and subscribe to Shadow Boss Tales so we can keep telling stories like this one together. Before you go, I want to ask you something important. Please, in the comments below, tell me what you would have done in Marisol's place, circling those words with a trembling hand. Would you have had the courage to look past the danger and see only a person who needed saving? Marisol Vance never became rich, never became famous, and never sought either. But every Thursday evening, long after that night, she would glance toward the empty corner booth and feel something settle quietly in her chest, the understanding that once, in a diner full of strangers, she had chosen compassion over fear, and it had been enough to change everything.